What is up, guys? Welcome to the Master Data Mechanic course. This is volume 1 and it's going to be a hand to note 4 tutorial. Talk about tips and tricks for using the software in the most efficient way possible. Now at this stage there is no official hand to note 4 tutorial, which technically makes this the first video course on using hand to note 4, but possibly depending on when you're watching this, there will at that point maybe be a full hand to note 4 official tutorial, but this one's still going to be worth watching. Sometimes we find tips and tricks that maybe the developers aren't fully aware of, hacks in the way that you can use the software in a more efficient way. So we'll be talking about all of the important features of hand to note. Further in the course, so later volumes, we're going to talk about architecture. What we really mean is creating custom stats and setting up the auto-generated pop-ups. Anything to do with building a fully functional HUD package with all of the information you need, and also to an extent constructing filters as well. Further in the course, perhaps the next volume, we'll talk about player pool analysis. This is one of hand to note 4's most powerful features. It has been rebranded as multiplayer reports. It used to be called range research. Now it's called multiplayer reports. We'll talk about why that's the case during the course. And then finally, in the later parts of the course, we'll talk about what I refer to as analytic exploitation. This is using the data that we have to generate exploitative strategies against individual opponents. And we can also use a lot of the same information for our own database analysis. So there's really 3 key areas in which hand to note 4 is useful: hero database analysis, villain analysis for the purposes of exploitation, and then player pool analysis, so we can figure out a default exploitative strategy for playing in a specific pool. Now this is the introduction video, so we're going to talk very briefly about the differences between the newer hand to note 4, which is currently in beta at the time of making this training video. Maybe by the time you're watching this, it will be out of beta stage, but it is probably more advanced than hand to note 3. Even at this stage, it's significantly more powerful. By powerful, I mean the speed that it imports and processes data, and it also has a lot less bugs than hand to note 3. Some of the most common bugs players were dealing with using hand to note 3 especially occurred with large data sets. It was very difficult to run player pool analysis on hand samples more than 15 or 20 million. You really needed a lot of system resources, and even if you had them, there would still be lots of crashes and freezes where your database had been processing for hours and basically just ran out of memory and refused to release that memory to unfreeze the program. Hand to note 4 is much better in this regard. One of the reasons why players are a little bit reluctant to make the migration to hand to note 4 is there are apparently some features that hand to note 3 had that hand to note 4 doesn't have. And those features are actually not important. And the reason why is that the paradigm or the way that the software is supposed to be used has shifted. So with hand to note 3, it was all about creating custom stats. So when we did database analysis, it was based around custom stats. If we did player pool analysis or range research, it was based around custom stats. And everything had to be that way because if you look at the filtering system in hand to note 3, it's very weak. There aren't really many situations where you would want to use the filtering system in hand to note 3. When you compare it to other trackers like Holder Manager or Poker Tracker, the filtering system in hand to note 3 was not very good. Let's just put it that way. Now, while there seems to be a few less tools in terms of creating custom stats in hand to note 4, the filtering system has had a major revamp, to the point where the filtering system is now clearly better than Holder Manager, Poker Tracker, or any other tracking software. So although the custom stats didn't take a big step forward, aside from the fact that they process way faster than they did previously, now we can combine the strength of both approaches. So it's no longer a case where we have to have a huge amount of custom stats. We can actually have less custom stats in hand to note 4 than we did in hand to note 3, and then we can do the rest of the work with the very strong filtering system. And there are some advantages to real-time filtering, because one of the issues with custom stats is every time we'd want to see the value of a new custom stat, we would have to clear and rebuild the entire database. Whereas what we can do now is have a pretty good selection of custom stats, And if we want to see a specific data point, we can just run a filter for that. There's no need to clear and rebuild everything because filtering occurs in real time. It doesn't make use of pre-compiled stats. It's a filter you run in real time on the database, so you can see the result of that filter instantly without the need to clear and rebuild, much in the same way as other trackers like Holder Manager work, for example. So maximizing the use of Hand to Note 4 involves a different usage pattern compared to Hand to Note 3. And that's going to be a decent amount of the focus in this tutorial, is understanding how we can maximize the value of software that's focused in a slightly different area. If we're going into this expecting to be able to use Hand to Note 4 in exactly the same way as Hand to Note 3, I think we've missed the point of what was intended by the developers. And of course, we just don't know what was intended fully because we don't have any documentation for using Hand to Note 4 at this stage. Let's talk as well about Hand to Note versus other trackers. So, common question that a new player is going to have is, which tracker should I use? So we obviously have Holder Manager 3, we have Poker Tracker 4, we also have DriveHard 2, which is a solid tracker, and then we have Hand to Note 4. So which one should we be using? My opinion is that there isn't really much of a contest here at this stage. Hand to Note 4 is significantly more powerful than any other poker tracker offering. And one of the simple reasons for that is what we can refer to as mass cloning. We can very quickly create a large amount of custom stats based on other stats. So imagine, for example, I'd invested a large amount of time creating an array of stats for single raised pots. It could be c-bet on every street, raise on every street. Imagine I have a few hundred stats that I've created for single raised pots. Now let's imagine I want all of those same stats, but for 3-bet pots. Even if other trackers support custom stats, we would have to individually recreate each one of those stats for a 3-bet pot. And then if we wanted those same stats for a 4-bet pot, we'd have to do the same thing again. This takes a very long time, even to generate several hundred stats. With mass cloning, if we have all of those stats for single raise pots, we can simply select them all and mass clone them and apply a change where we make them all 3-bet pot stats instead. And within about 10 seconds, you've just replicated 300 stats. They're the same, apart from the fact that they are for 3-bet pots. Then you can do the same thing for 4-bet pots. Another 10 seconds, you have all of those stats for 4-bet pots. This allows us to build very large HUD packages much faster than we can with any other tracker. Now, it does still take time. Building a large HUD package in Hand to Note 4 is still a significant time investment, but the time taken to build a very large HUD package is reduced by an order of magnitude as a result of the mass cloning feature. And then once we've created those stats, we can use all of them for player pool analysis or range research or multiplayer reports, however you want to refer to it. Those are all terms for the same thing. And furthermore, we actually have a scripting language that can be used to determine which players are pulled from the database for the purposes of player pool analysis. And if you look at trackers that also offer custom stat creation, first of all, it's very limited. And secondly, we often can't use those custom stats for player pool analysis. In some cases, you might be able to do that, but you need an add-on. For example, Holder Manager and Poker Tracker support NoteCaddy add-on. That allows us to create custom stats and run player pool analysis on all of those custom stats. The only problem is everything is just listed in a table, kind of like an Excel document. With Hand to Note player pool analysis, we can lay everything out, we can colorize everything very much in the same way that we create a HUD. In fact, range research is often run on the same HUD and pop-ups that we use for actually playing in-game. And it's just a lot easier and more convenient to access the data. The only downside is, if we list the downside, is that we can't actually export that data at the current stage. There's no API for extracting the data and using it in some other script or function. Whereas technically, NoteCaddy does actually allow us to do that. It's a lot easier to extract the data and potentially use it as part of a second script. So we don't want to say that Hand to Note wins in every area, but generally it is by far the best choice for player pool analysis. Other software does sometimes offer range research, but it may be based on pre-decided stats. So there could be a set of 100, 200 stats which you can use for range research, but it's not possible to run range research on custom stats. So really the only option for full range research at this stage is hand to note. And although you can do it with NoteCaddy, NoteCaddy doesn't have a mass cloning feature and it hasn't been updated in probably over a decade. It's very time consuming to make custom stats. And as mentioned, the output, not visually appealing unless you're specifically looking to extract data for use in a secondary script. Another feature that's very interesting for hand to note is a feature known as action profit. Now, you might think that all trackers show action profit, right? Because when you run a filter in those trackers, you get to see your winnings and your losses after you run that filter. That's not what action profit is. You see, when we run a filter in trackers in general, when we see the winnings amount or the losses amount, that's actually for the overall hand. Whereas what action profit shows us is the amount we make in EV from that specific decision point. So to give you a really simple example, imagine that we are looking at flop c-bet, for example. We're trying to troubleshoot whether our flop c-betting strategy is profitable for different types of hands. And let's say we filter for a specific hand group and we see that that particular hand group, when it c-bets, is losing at 100 big blinds per 100 hands. In other words, we're losing one big blind every time we fire a continuation bet. Well, that one big blind we're losing is actually for the overall hand. It's not for the c-bet decision. You see, if we open raised pre-flop, then we actually invested 3 big blinds into the pot. So if we're only losing one big blind on the flop c-bet, that might be acceptable. It could still be a profitable c-bet overall. What action profit does is it just shows us how much we make on the c-bet. So if action profit is positive, it means the c-bet was profitable. If action profit is negative, it means the c-bet was negative. Now, it used to be that when you ran range research, making use of custom stats, you would be able to see action profit for all of the custom stats. And you can't do that in Hand to Note 4 currently. They may add the feature, they may not. And there are many players just sitting around waiting for this, saying things like, I'll migrate to Hand to Note 4 when they add action profit for all of the custom stats. But remember, we said there's a bit of a paradigm shift here. The usage of the software has fundamentally been changed. And we can access action profit through the filtering system. So if you want to see action profit, it's recommended you just make use of the filtering system. This is not a reason not to migrate to Hand to Note 4 over Hand to Note 3. But many other trackers, as far as I'm aware, don't actually offer action profit as a stat, because it basically involves looking at how much you've invested at that point in the hand to determine what your overall profit is for a specific action. Whereas many trackers just show you winnings and losses for the overall hand, given that you filtered for a specific scenario. Now, we don't want to say that Hand to Note 4 is perfect. There are definitely some issues with the software. Hopefully they will be ironed out over time. And the development cycle seems to be fairly slow. Hand to Note 4 was first announced years ago. I think possibly even 5 or more years ago, and it's still in beta stage. However, I would say that we've reached the stage where Hand to Note is the industry standard tracker. So it used to be Holder Manager, with maybe some players making use of Poker Tracker, and Hand to Note was just kind of this new kid on the block, the alternate option. And I think originally it was mostly a note-taking software. It wasn't really a full tracker. It was called Hand to Note because it notated hands in note format for you to be able to use in game. So it's really some kind of note-taking assistant. It's now a fully fledged tracker, and it's reached a stage where it's just way more powerful than anything else on the market. So really, if you're a serious poker player, Hand to Note 4 really should be your choice. It is the industry standard software at this stage. Now, most players don't know how to get the most out of Hand to Note 4 at this stage, maybe to some extent due to the lack of documentation, but also fairly complex software. There's a lot you can do with it. After watching this course, you'll know all of the important functionality. So thanks very much for checking out this introductory video to the Master Data Mechanic course, and I look forward to catching you guys in the course.